Hey everyone, I'm Emily Hemingway with TechSTL, and we are here to talk about some really exciting legislation that just passed in Missouri. Some of the most exciting news that we've seen in capital policy for the startup community, the recent legislative pass for House Bill 3231, specifically one that's tied to the Missouri Angel Investment Incentive Act. So I am joined today with some really great leaders here in the St. Louis region to talk about why this is so important. First of all, thank you guys all for coming out today and for being such a big part of this work. So for those who don't know who you are, let me introduce everyone. So we have Jim Malle, who is a Missouri public policy expert. He's also the Missouri Coalition Manager of Right to Start, a key advisor to TechSTL's new Public Policy Committee. Jim brings the legislative and policy context behind House Bill 3231, including how the bill moved from Jefferson City and what it signals about Missouri's innovation priorities. So thank you, Jim. We also have David Weaver. David is an attorney for entrepreneurs and the director of the new AngeLAB here at TechSTL, where he helps founders and investors understand the legal, financial, and deal structure realities of early stage capital. David annually represents dozens of early stage companies, helping them prepare for and raise funds from angels and institutional venture funds. He brings the practical lens on how angel tax credits can influence investor behavior, founder readiness, and the formation of investable deals. Thank you, David. We also have Ben Johnson. He is the Senior Vice President of Strategy and Operations at BioSTL, as well as the President of NEXTMissouri, a statewide coalition focused on strengthening Missouri's innovation economy. NEXTMissouri led the effort to pass the Missouri Angel Investment Incentive Act, drafting the bill, securing sponsors, and navigating the legislative process from bill introduction to passage. Ben brings deep historical knowledge of the effort and a statewide ecosystem perspective on why this matters for Missouri's competitiveness, especially for startups, investors, and technology-driven job creation. So I've got a great panel here today. All right, Ben, so we're going to start with you because you have been such a big part of this. Can you give us some policy context? So NEXTMissouri and other ecosystem partners like BioSTL and Cultivation Capital, who's a member of ours, they have been making the case that Missouri needs stronger tools to compete for innovation-driven growth. What actually passed in House Bill 3231, and why is the Angel Investment Incentive Act such a significant development for Missouri after so many years of advocacy?
Well, thank you, Emily. Thanks for pulling us together. Thank you for hosting this important conversation. NEXTMissouri, BioSTL, all of our partners, our entrepreneurs are very excited about this passing. It's been a long time coming. First and foremost, it's important for entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs are the lifeblood of our economy. More than 85% of the new jobs in the state and across the country are driven by new businesses, and capital is the lifeblood of those startups. And so entrepreneurs are the beneficiaries. While angel investors receive the credit, while the capital from the angel investors are the fuel of that growth, it is the startups and the entrepreneurs that are most important and are the beneficiaries. So what passed in the angel investment credit is just that. It's a credit to help incentivize more capital coming into our early stage startup companies, helping new investors come off the sidelines into an asset class, into types of investments that they might not be doing, or helping our existing angels have a little bit more capital in their pocket at the end of the year when deals are closing so that a company can close that round or raise a little bit more to fuel their growth and fuel their job creation. In preparing for this, I was going back through some notes. My first message on this, my first email on this was from February 10th, 2007. Where Missouri, for a long time, Missouri has been good at having the tools of traditional economic growth. We have not always had a full toolkit in supporting startups, supporting innovation growth. And so a group called the St. Louis Capital Alliance back in the day was chipping away at it. And our friends in Kansas City have been working on it for a long time. And it was really, how do we bring the state together, understand that innovation-based capital, angel investment capital isn't just a St. Louis or a Kansas City thing. It really impacts entrepreneurs across the whole state. And that was why BioSTL, with some friends in Springfield, Jim's former organization in Kansas City, helped co-found NEXTMissouri to be that statewide voice for new businesses. So through the angel investment credit, a startup can go to the state to be allocated a pool of credits to help fuel their fundraising. They can allocate those credits to an angel investor. That angel investor will help de-risk their investment, maybe help incentivize putting a little bit more in that deal so that company can grow and succeed here in Missouri.
Well, and this is a great example as to why we needed an organization like NEXTMissouri.
It was. For a long time, we had, partners across the state doing different things or working at different times. But whether it's NEXTMissouri or Jim will say more about the Missouri Right to Start, we didn't have organizations that were really knitting together the rural communities, the urban communities, bridging the importance of new businesses as that stool, one leg of that stool for economic development in Missouri.
Well, thank you for fighting for as long as you have in leading this. So we're going to turn it over to David. So for the founders and investors who are not tax policy experts, this is not something that everybody wakes up like Ben and thinks about for however many years that he did. How does an angel investor tax credit generally work? And what does it change in the risk calculation for someone considering an early stage investment? Also, how do you see this impacting regional programming like AngeLAB that you're now leading?
Well, let's start with the last one first. Hopefully this loosens up capital in Missouri. We have a very traditional economy here. We also see the benefits, and we have a significant number of the people who can invest, who really understand the need for that type of innovation and high risk growth type businesses. And so this gives an extra incentive to maybe expand the pool of people who are willing to deploy funds. Because that's a lot of the challenge we face sometimes with startups is it's getting those first checks. It's getting those early funds, because after you get a little bit of traction, you can truly attract money from anywhere in the country. And if a company really, if we're really trying to start the right companies, they are going to be able to attract money from throughout the country. Hopefully this, adds a little, it lessens the friction. Let's hope it greases the wheels. And gives a little extra benefit, and because on the state tax side. How does one get one? Well, we have the statute passed, but there's actually a lot of regulation that still will need to be put in place before the end of the year. The primary institution in the state, the agency, is the Missouri Technology Corporation, which will be leading a lot of this. And if you're not familiar with MTC, MTC is a public-private partnership. It's funded by the state. They also get federal funds. And they're basically a public-private partnership that serves as a venture capital fund. And they typically have not led in the past, but they follow on. They match funds. And so one of the things that MTC has developed over the years is because they have to approve and they have to screen and approve companies before they're eligible or approved for funding by the MTC investment committees, is they have a process. And the statute basically will piggyback onto that process. So the first thing is for a company to be eligible for tax credits, for its investors to be able to get those tax credits, it has to be an approved company under the statute. And that means they're going to have to go through a process with MTC. I don't consider this necessarily a bad thing. As I was telling Ben before we got started, I've represented lots of companies that gone through MTC funding, and frankly, most startups need to go through the car wash and get their legal and structural issues cleaned up, and usually a financing is when that happens. However, it is going to present a hurdle. There is an application process that one has to make, and it reads in a very similar. We don't know what the details are going to be yet because those regulations are still yet to be made, but it reads similar to the same process that one would go through if they were applying for and obtaining MTC money. And the assumption I have in here too is because one of the issues that a founding company has to face is you're committing to stay in Missouri if you get these tax credits up to 10 years. And if your company moves, your investors don't lose their tax credit. The company will have to repay that tax credit. And there's a clawback, which means the companies will have to go through, again, the process. That means they have to prove they're a viable company. They're going to have to present their business plan. They're going to have to fill out documents on economic impact, much like they would now if they're applying for MTC money. Then once they're approved, I assume from this going to have to sign a participation agreement, because there's going to have to be some agreement so that MTC can claw back funds if that company ever leaves. And they're also then going to be subject to quarterly and annual reporting in a similar fashion to an MTC funded company. So this does add an extra little bit of burden to a company. That's not necessarily bad, because a lot of startups could use that kind of compliance, but it does prevent maybe some of the quick things you see, or I don't know if it'll prevent them. People are going to have to make trade-offs. For example, just Friday I incorporated a company, and Monday we signed a convertible note for their first check.
Mhm.
That's not going to be possible under this paradigm unless everybody's willing to forego. I guess I could leave open the door. I'm curious when they get into the regulation and development, for example, if they have some kind of retroactive windows for things like that, there may be some opportunities for that, but it's not in the statute. And so we're going to have a lot of advocacy to try and influence MTC for some of this. At the same time, maybe there's opportunity. If you go through the MTC program for the tax credit, that's going to lay a nice foundation for when you apply for matching funds.
Well, thank goodness you understand these things, because not every founder is going to do that. But I think it's in the same vein for the next question, which is not everybody understands policy. Not everybody sees policy as being directly impactful for them. I would say most entrepreneurs wouldn't necessarily see that as being the case. This is a great example of policy that does have a direct impact on citizens and entrepreneurs. So, Jim, as the Missouri Coalition manager for Right to Start, which is now a national initiative in advocating for entrepreneurs across the country, specifically through policy. And you're also leading a number of initiatives across the state of Missouri, so you understand kind of the application of this work. Why does this policy matter so much statewide, right? Because this is not just St. Louis impact. This is all across the state of Missouri. Can you give us some perspective on what that looks like?
Yeah, absolutely. I feel so. I've been in this arena for quite some time. I ran a program called Launch KC in Kansas City. And that's really, you start in Kansas City with the idea fund of $25,000 through Digital Sandbox, and you continue to move through to Launch KC. And then you don't really have an avenue. And we call it the Valley of Death, and then we see entrepreneurs moving out of Missouri, out of Kansas City, out of St. Louis to go find capital elsewhere. So that's what's really exciting to me is I think that we'll be able to maintain and retain a bunch of companies while capital is flooding in. I think it's a market signal too. I think this whole session really was for entrepreneurship when you look at it. We had MTC, getting $2.5 million. A couple sessions ago, we had the Office of Entrepreneurship, and now we're looking at angel tax credits. So, all these things are starting to, be a signal that we're investing in entrepreneurs. So I think that's what's really exciting for Right to Start and specifically our coalition. These folks are seeing that policy is changing and it's impacting them personally and their businesses. So, when entrepreneurs don't understand that, that's when we come in and really kind of help them understand that these things are very impactful to the city, to their business, and to the growth of to the economy here in St. Louis and across Missouri.
So as a follow-up to that, so the bill creates different credit levels depending upon where the business is located, right? So if there's incentives for rural communities as opposed to urban, like here in St. Louis, as well as in certified Missouri innovation zones.
Right.
How should we think about that structure, especially as St. Louis is looking at other opportunities that are in this bill, like innovation districts, founder density and the data around where our entrepreneurs are congregating, as well as place-based economic development?
Yeah, so one thing that I really loved about the bill is that they incentivize rural areas. So they're not just focusing on Kansas City or St. Louis, because that's always been somewhat of an argument for people in Springfield and Joplin and Columbia. They have robust entrepreneur ecosystems in those cities. And, we're going to start seeing that growth even more. So that was one thing that I really loved, that I think 40% credit is in, major cities, 50% you see in the rural areas, and then you get out to 60% in these innovations districts or centers. And, I think that will then capitalize on economic growth in the downtown areas. And, here in St. Louis, I think we could use some revitalization in the downtown area.
Yes, we could use that.
And from a different way of looking at incentives too. I was working very heavily on real estate tax incentives. This is a new and unique way of looking at economic growth instead of looking at it through abatements and so forth.
Well, and I think part of it is really reframing the conversation around where innovation is popping up all across the state of Missouri, right? It is not just a St. Louis and Kansas City opportunity. That we've got some major unicorns coming out of Columbia. We've got the critical minerals industry that's growing out of Rolla, right? Like, we have pockets all over the state, and it's really our challenge is figuring out how to connect all of those things.
I think we've seen that with NEXTMissouri in members and partnerships in every corner of the state, whether it is a local existing central business district that has an incubator co-working space, or AI transforming, in an hour, you can build and start a company that took years to start. And you can do that in any corner of our state, really transforming that. Our state is an innovation economy, and each area of our state has different unique strengths. And the Angel Credit, coupled with this downtown business district bill, allows each community to say, here's our geography that's important, here are the sectors of innovation that are important, and a toolkit of incentives, including the Angel bill, that could be used. But, for us, put on my BioSTL hat, our innovation districts, Cortex and 39 North here in our medical and agricultural sciences that aren't in our downtown district, the Angel Credit being widely geographically applicable could be leveraged to a greater percentage in the downtown communities, but could be used in any neighborhood, on any street, any address in the state for an innovation new startup that's creating economic activity.
Well, because what we're seeing, this opportunity is opening up regardless of where you are, but we're still having the highest concentration of resources that are geographically centered, right? So how are we unlocking the resources that may exist most heavily in the urban areas where we have those innovation districts, and instead bridging it across the entire state?
Yeah, and I think that's where Missouri is a unique economy. Right? We have an opportunity to sort of break down this conversation of urban-rural economic divide. In our innovation economy, our rural and urban economies are inextricably linked. Our geospatial innovation that's right here in the Post Building in downtown St. Louis is deeply connected to our grower producers in rural Missouri. Our digital healthcare applications in our major hospital systems in St. Louis and Kansas City and Springfield are deeply connected to our rural health transformation across the state. And so I think that place-based, where we have density of innovators who are bumping into each other, connecting with investors, trading ideas, building new companies, but also connecting to solving problems across every geography of our state and making Missouri and St. Louis a center for solving global problems, are the things that these kinds of tools, an Angel Credit across the state, or our innovation zones in building density around innovation, help unlock for the state with tools that we just haven't had previously.
Well, and to confirm that it took many years to get here, right? But this is also just the beginning, right? Like, this incentive is really starting kind of small, right? We're talking about $6 million of how the fight isn't over, right, Ben? Like, we now have to prove that this is valuable so that we can keep raising that bar, keep making these strategic incentive or investments in the innovation community. That's just the reality of all policy.
I think that's exactly right. I think some of what David said earlier about companies raising capital from outside of Missouri. BioGenerator, the investment arm of BioSTL, has invested about $50 million of nonprofit dollars in 130 companies over our history. They've attracted $3 billion in additional co- and follow-on investment, from 85% of that from outside of Missouri, to drive growth. As David said, like, our companies need to compete globally for capital, but it's that early capital that really makes them sticky, that puts down roots here, that creates economic activity in St. Louis and across Missouri, while they attract the capital from somebody else to help fuel that growth.
Yeah, I mean, I often advise entrepreneurs, if you really have a scalable idea that's national or international, you should not be limiting yourself to your locality for raising money. But the practicality is, you still start where you have relationships. You still start where you know people. You want to get some traction. To say, hey, you go out and get a bed and breakfast in San Jose for a month. I mean, that's not always practical. We have competition. We needed this because the Kansas City.
Missouri has competition, or St. Louis has?
Well, Missouri has competition because over the last few years, one of the challenges we've faced is that a lot of the entrepreneurial community has moved to the Kansas side because of Kansas's very generous angel tax credits. We needed this. We need to compete with the states that border us. We need to be attractive to companies coming here because we have a lot of things that are appealing. And when simply a company can move across to the other side of state line road in Kansas City and get a tax credit, that's a real challenge to a community. It doesn't hurt Kansas City Metro, but it hurts the state.
Mm-hmm. I saw that quite a bit in Kansas City when I was living there. People would just border hop quite a bit.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. I think this was a major part of the conversation in the state capitol as this bill was moving forward, particularly with conservative leadership. We had great champion in Brad Christ as the sponsor of this bill, Senator Curtis Gregory, Steve Roberts on the Senate side as well. But a lot of that conversation was, why do investors need an angel credit, particularly our high net worth angel investors? And again, the angel investor, to our friends as an angel investor, are really just the vehicle. It's the entrepreneurs. And Missouri, like Kansas, like Arkansas, like most of our neighboring states, this is a place where the early stage investment market just doesn't quite function, right? It's a market that really only functions in a couple of places in the country, typically on the coasts. And so the role of the state, the role of this credit, the role, I think, of organizations like ours in ESO is not to replace that market. Or to displace that market. It's to help catalyze that market. And angel credit can do that. The angel credit's not large enough that an investor is going to just throw good money after a bad deal, right? But it is enough to help, my family made our money in manufacturing. I don't really know much about that AI geospatial thing. I'm doing well in the S&P right now, so why would I risk it in this early stage risky equity investment? It's enough to de-risk. Right? We talk about de-risking technology, yes, de-risking innovation, right? That's the game we work with our entrepreneurs.
And it's an immediate return.
Exactly. And this is the same kind of de-risk, prime that market, prove the credit works, right? We will see that economic impact in companies started, jobs creation, wages paid, taxes returned to the state. And then as the market functions, then things like the angel credit can step back because we've become a magnet from capital from across the world, and we've got our local capital seeding companies that are going to grow here.
I saw recently a graphic that some people might find surprising. Other than Chicago, St. Louis has the highest GDP of all the Midwestern cities. I mean, higher in Indianapolis, higher in Oklahoma City, higher in Kansas City. We have the funds here, and the state of Missouri has funds. A lot of it is mature money. We have mature economy. And again, it's not a knock on people. It is just familiarity.
Yes.
When your money has been made through growing, private equity does great in Missouri. You can raise a real estate fund on the corner like a lemonade stand practically. I might joke often. Venture is the hard part because it's not as familiar. Ironically, the first half of the 20th century, St. Louis was closer to Silicon Valley than almost any other city in the country. But that money now is not as connected to that risk stage. And so we really kind of have to reawaken some of that a little bit and give an incentive to writing checks. And when you get it immediate.
Yeah. Well, okay. So let's wrap this with a very clear call to action, because as we said, this is not the end of this work, right? This is just now starting, that each of you guys represents a different demographic that really needs to lean into this moment. So let's start first with David. When we're talking about founders and investors and even accountants and attorneys that are support providers, how should they be preparing for this coming? What should they be doing in either supporting their work or preparing for the implementation of these incentives?
The number one thing they should be doing on the founder side, or anybody serving founders, is stay on top of this, because the regulations are going to be where the details matter. What we do for clients has not yet been completely fleshed out. And so stay on top of it, because there is going to be a process and procedure. It's going to take an application. It's going to take time. You can't just turn around and get the credit. Now, hopefully we can advocate maybe for some windows, maybe some retroactively. I don't know. I'm totally talking from my wish list, not from what it may be. The second side is if you are an accredited investor, which is a definitional term under the securities laws, and you are interested in becoming an investor, get in touch with us. Get in touch with BioSTL. Talk to people who are raising in VC funds. Give us a call regarding AngeLAB, because that's what we're trying to grow. We're trying to grow the number of people who understand this and create a community that is all the time consistently on top of what is happening. Because we don't want, one of the things about this is we don't want St. Louis companies to be getting their last check. When they get their first check, we don't want it to be their last check. We want investors who understand what it takes to help fund these companies so they have an opportunity to grow and bring all those other funds to St. Louis.
So Ben, I know that NEXTMissouri is also putting together some follow-up resources of how to stay engaged, how to learn more about what's happening. Can you give us some perspective on what those resources are?
Yeah, nextmissouri.org. Check it out. We'll be putting together both, overviews, one-pagers, how does the credit function, what is in the bill, webinars. We'll be engaging our stakeholders. Join NEXTMissouri, more than 400 individuals, more than 45 organizations across the state. Sign up to join that mailing list. We'll be engaging with MTC, with the Department of Economic Development as they're working through that rulemaking process. As we said, we're almost to the finish line. We'll cross that when the governor signs it, or the relay, whatever it is. We'll start the next lap, which is really about, as David and others have been talking about, really about how is this administered, how is it implemented, just like our partners at Right to Start with the creation of the Office of Entrepreneurship and then leaning in to support that new office, support DED and standing it up, we'll be leaning in with DED and MTC to stand this up. So please join. This is just the beginning, and implementing this policy is important. And then what are the next opportunities for continuing to make Missouri the most friendly place to start a business and grow a business?
And so NEXTMissouri is a membership-based organization. Are people able to sign up for a newsletter on the website?
They are. You can join. Our baseline membership is free. We will spam you at no cost.
Love it.
And then a very modest memberships to help grow the partnership across the state. So we've got voices across the state, and really centering the entrepreneur in what are the policies that are going to support entrepreneurs.
Awesome. And last up, Jim, Right to Start. Tell us more about what that looks like across the state of Missouri and how people can support the continued policy conversation around entrepreneurship.
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing I do want to mention is that, you mentioned earlier on that this is just the start. So with policy, I worked with Ben at NEXTMissouri when we first got that going. MTC was funded at about $17 million, went down to zero. So we had to get that going. I think we got $1 million the first year, and we thought that was a massive win. And when we ended up getting that up to 10 million up until the recent cuts. But, those are things that continue to move. And I think that this can be something that will continue to move as well. So I'm really excited about that. But for across the state, I think Right to Start is definitely going to be out there in all different areas of the state, really educating folks on what these tax credits can do, talking to them, and really understanding where they're coming from too, and what some of their problems are through this process, so we can kind of help navigate that. We just want to be a resource to entrepreneurs across the state of Missouri and really help guide them in the right direction, because we know that this can be really frustrating. You're starting a business and then you're dealing with tax credits. You don't know who to talk to or the right person to talk to. So that's really the role that we want to play here.
And where do people go to find more information about Right to Start?
Righttostart.org. So yeah, go there. We've got a lot of great things going on. June 24th, we have a policy town hall with a lot of great policy leaders in the state of Missouri that will be talking about the angel tax credits and everything that we spoke about today.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for all the work that you do in driving entrepreneurship and innovation across the state of Missouri. Also, thank you for joining us today. We will be continuing to watch this information and the progression of this bill and all this work, not only in St. Louis, but across the state. So we may be bringing you back once we hit the next milestone. All right. Thank you.